Good evening. I want to welcome everybody to this Wednesday's meeting, November 16th, of the Carson City Airport Authority. This is going to be our last meeting of the year, and we have a packed agenda, so I'd ask that we convene early this evening. We do have a lot to discuss. I'm hoping that all the members of the authority took my request to heart and did some due diligence on this evening's agenda so that we can keep our discussions to a minimum and help expedite the meeting so that we're not here, to the wee hours of the morning. In any event, my long lost good friend Carl, can because
You missed one of these things.
can you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please, Carl? Hey, we are friends. I mean,
Absolutely.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Carl. We put a lot of thought into this evening's agenda, so there's not going to be any modification to it. Although we reserve the right to do that, there won't be any this evening that I'm aware of, at least. Approval of the minutes of the past meeting of the Airport Authority. Anybody have any comments on that? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion to approve minutes of our past Airport Authority meeting. Second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Pick your poison there, Danielle. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed and abstain? One abstention. Motion carries. The minutes of the past meeting have been approved. Public comment. This is a time for members of the public who wish to address the Airport Authority on any agendized or non-agendized matters. And you know what? I forgot something trying to move along here. I'm going to back up for a minute. Could we have a roll call and determination of a quorum, Danielle? I'm sorry about this, folks.
Chairperson Golden,
Here.
Vice Chair Pulitz,
Present.
Treasurer Rogers, Member Jones,
Here.
Member Hamilton,
Here.
Member Hutter, Member Norvell.
Here.
A quorum is present.
Thank you. And I've been informed that John Rogers has been, he's not going to be here this evening due to unforeseen circumstances. So, back to what I was stating, public comment. This is a time for members of the public who wish to address the Airport Authority to speak on any agendized and non-agendized matters related to the airport. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person or topic. And if your item requires any extended discussion, I'd request that you address me after the meeting to put the matter on the agenda for a future Airport Authority meeting. So any member of the public care to address the Airport Authority this evening on a matter that is not on the agenda? Okay, we'll close public comment. Airport engineer's report. Do we have the airport engineer on the line? Okay.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. This is Chris Knox. Can you hear me?
Yes, Chris. If you could briefly walk us through the salient points of your report this month, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yeah, not a lot to update from last month. With the acquisition of snow removal equipment, we're still waiting on that equipment to be assembled, and we're still anticipating a December, more likely January delivery of that equipment, but we're staying in touch on a weekly basis with the manufacturer on that, and we'll provide an update when we have a specific date. The aeronautical survey for nighttime approach, we're solidly in phase 2 of that project now, proceeding with the design of the offset PAPI and the final coordination with the FAA flight procedures. That project's moving along nicely. We did get a project initiation letter from the FAA for the fiscal year 23 portion of this project, which is the subsequent construction. And right now that project is funded to cover both the offset PAPI and the mouse of approach light system. We will continue to plug away on that, but that's good news that the FAA is showed support of that project for fiscal year 23, the third and final phase of that project. The other project we got an initiation letter on from the FAA this past month was the snow removal equipment building. They have shown support for that project. As you recall, we designed that and bid it and got no bids on that. And so we have gotten an initiation letter on that project that will allow us to bid that and fund that in fiscal year 23. The one other project that we are still inquiring about with the FAA is the environmental assessment on the runway extension. That was not on the letter we received, but we sent follow-on correspondence with them to the FAA to inquire about whether or not that project is going to get funded. We've not gotten a response on that yet, so we'll continue to have that conversation and report back when we have some additional information on it. But that is essentially the update for the month of November here, and I'm certainly entertaining any questions that Mr. Chairman you might have or the other members of the board.
None from me, Chris. Thank you so much. Anyone else from the Airport Authority have any questions for Chris? Okay. Seeing none, we're going to move on to our consent agenda. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you. So we have a lease assignment, which is really just a perfunctory matter that needs to be addressed on our consent agenda. I trust everybody has had a chance to review that and understands what this is. It's just moving from the leaseholder to the association of this particular leasehold. So if we can, I'd like to act on the consent agenda unless someone feels that this requires additional information and discussion. Okay, can we have a motion to pass the consent agenda?
So moved.
And we have a second. Okay, we have a motion and a second to pass the consent agenda. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion carries. Public hearings, item number 1 for discussion and possible action. The authorization to issue a notice of default to KCXP Investments for a lease they hold along Taxiway Charlie. That lease was entered into with a 2-year requirement to build hangars. This was back in 2008. The authority needs to determine a deadline for cure of breach and termination of the lease or other remedy. And I have to disclose that I must recuse myself from this conversation due to a conflict of interest, and I will not be voting on it. And Vice Chair Pulitz will be taking over while I take a seat in the audience.
All right. Thanks, Mr. Golden. I'm trying to pull this up here. I'm scrolling through this lease. So yeah. I'm just going through getting through this massive lease agreement that we just approved. Get to the next item. Yeah. So to begin with, I'd like to have our airport manager give us a quick historical recap of, and maybe with your assistance, on what we've done and noticed and the legal part of what we've been up to on this particular issue.
Yeah.
Would you like to start, Mr. Takis?
Yeah, why don't I start?
Okay.
The airport manager, I discussed this extensively.
Very good.
So in 2008, we entered into a lease agreement with KCXP Investments, the principal is Tom Gonzalez, to build hangars on 1.5 acres along Taxiway Charlie. If you recall, the real estate market at the time, it was crashing bad and there really was no construction going on. The lease required that plans be within 120 days and the construction be completed within 2 years. Mr. Gonzalez came back to the airport authority and said, look, I don't have anybody who's interested in buying. I really can't build right now. So at the time, the authority said, okay, we'll give you a little bit more time. This is quite a bit later. And there were several reaches out, attempts made to communicate with him to get his project going. And certainly we've seen a lot of other projects going, so we know that the market has changed. In December of 2021, the airport manager, after discussion with me, sent a letter to KCXP Enterprises or Investments, telling them that if they didn't proceed with their project, they would be treated in default of their project. At the time, we got some oral feedback from a manager who works with Mr. Gonzalez that he was working on putting together a project. So we staff decided, okay, well, let's give him a little bit of time and see what develops. Well, nothing has really developed. And so we thought it was appropriate to bring this to the authority's attention, because the lease says, on page 2 of the lease, it says, tenants shall commence construction as set forth in Exhibit B, with the construction completed within 2 years of execution of the lease. And within 120 days of execution of the lease, the tenant was to record a record of survey, basically showing the sub-parcels of what he was going to build, and that way the assessor can assign assessor parcel numbers. None of that happened, and then when you go to the default provisions of the lease, it says failure to complete construction of the facilities is required by this lease, or extensions granted by the authority is a breach of the lease, and landlord may terminate this lease under this subsection H in its sole discretion upon 30 days written notice of his intention to terminate the lease. And the notice has to give certain things like what the alleged default is. And so the airport manager and I feel, and I thought from a legal standpoint, that's a decision that should be made by the authority, not simply by the airport staff, and that's why this item is on before you. We had heard that there may be some kind of attempt to get a project going there, but I've heard nothing and seen nothing about it. So unless there's somebody here in the audience who's involved in that, can speak to it, our staff recommendation is that you go ahead and give us authority to issue the notice of breach and the intent to terminate the lease, and also set a deadline. The lease says you have to give them at least 30 days. My inclination would be you'd give them like 60 days, something like that. Our next meeting isn't until January anyway. I don't know if the airport manager has anything to add to that.
I have a little bit to add to it. Just that, I really hope that the tenant is able to build in this leasehold. The last thing I'd like to see is somebody default on a lease. So if we can accommodate that, I would love to see that. But at the same time, we have to stick to what the lease says, and we have to act on these items, or it can put us in a bad position. So that's why we're here today.
Yeah, one other thing I want to add is one of the arguments that, and I haven't spoken with Mr. Gonzalez on this item directly, but one person who was speaking on his behalf said, well, aren't you better off just collecting rent? He's currently paying the rent and you're collecting it. Well, I think the lease rent is about 10 cents a square foot. The current appraisal price is 32 cents a square foot. And when we lease out property, the 10 cents per square foot or the 32 cents per square foot is not really the big part of the project. It's certainly not a big part of the project to someone who's building hangars. That's a really small slice. But what's important to us is when we lease it out, we want them to build the hangars. We will get real property tax on the improvements on the property, and we will get personal property tax on the aircraft that are placed in the hangar, which when new hangars are built, typically new aircraft are attracted to our airport. And so it isn't the 10 cents a square foot per year that's really driving the boat. But that was the response I gave. But ultimately, it's your decision. If that's important to you to get the 10 cents, and maybe you let it ride. But the staff belief is that you should go ahead and give notice of termination.
Thank you, Steve and Corey. Anybody else have a comment on this issue? Carl.
Well, I guess a comment and a question. My question would be, what would curing the breach mean in the eyes of the authority? And obviously, there's not going to magically be hangar buildings there in 60 days. So you can't really get straight with the lease in the sense that, the 2 years is up and the 2 years is up. So I fully support putting them on notice. The question we're going to have to answer is, what will materially curing the breach to our satisfaction mean? A letter back would be a great start. But that's just an open question there. To the point of whether, and I first off would say Corey's exactly right. We have to abide by our leases, and that's that's why we go through so much effort to get them right. These two parcels are really interesting in the sense that when we talk about, are they in demand? Are they desirous? And could we be getting the 30 cents plus of having actual developed hangars there? One of the things that's super nice about these is they're actually kind of bite-sized parcels. They're the kinds of ones that are, due to their location, I believe there's infrastructure there, or adjacent already at this point, and they're relatively modest size. These are parcels that I think, when we see interest from the community around, hey, we'd like to do a hangar project, but maybe not a massive hangar project, these seem like the kind of parcels that that would be very attractive. So I think it's in the best interest of the airport that we, make one more attempt to, see if there's even an interest in following up and making good on the lease, and otherwise, let's get moving with it.
Anybody else? Okay, I do have a comment. As you all know, I was sitting in the airport manager's seat for about 7 months, and I had this conversation with Mr. Gonzalez and his team back then, and they told me they're aware that they had to get going on that, and they were understanding that we gave them a big leeway, which was very nice of the airport authority. But while I was sitting in that seat, I've had quite a few people interested in leasing those parcels. And I think that if I ask the airport manager, can you confirm that as well, Corey?
There's definitely interest in leasing.
Yeah, I think that we would be negligent not to issue them this particular notice, because it's in our lease, and we've been generous, and we've been understanding, and we've been more than reasonable, but now we'd be hurting our airport if we didn't move forward, because we have people that want to develop that. And I think that we need to go ahead and agree to go ahead and provide KCXP Investments with this notice. Is there anybody who wants to make a motion, or go ahead?
Can I just add one thing? I'm integrating the comments I'm hearing from Member Hutter and what you've said. It might make sense to give them 65 days. And the reason I'm saying that is you don't know what kind of proposal would come back to you. And Member Hutter asked a really good question. What would we need to see to know that we want to continue this lease? And if I misunderstood that, Mr. Hutter, just correct me. But if you did it 65 days, that would give them a chance to get it back to us before the January meeting. And then you could have it on the January meeting. You could find out what's being proposed and go forward. I mean, one alternative would be that Mr. Gonzalez finds somebody else who wants to take an assignment of the lease. It only has, I think, 36 years left on it, but it's 10 cents a square foot, essentially. And that might be attractive to someone. Whereas if it's terminated and we put it back out to lease, we can give somebody a 50-year lease, which is probably more valuable to someone than the difference in 10 and 32 cents, just because 10 cents or 32 cents per square foot per year is still pretty small dollars compared to the construction costs and the other investment. But maybe somebody would come back. At least that's what we had heard was in the works. Somebody would be coming to us to take an assignment. But I haven't heard anybody come forward, so I don't know if anybody is here in the audience to do that. But I'm just suggesting if you do it, authorize us to give 65 days notice. Tell them it's terminating on the 65th day unless you cure it. And as you say, Member Hutter, What could he do to cure it in 65 days? I don't know, but if he wants to come back and tell us, maybe it's something that you would want to consider, or maybe it's not.
Well, and maybe we could have that conversation then in this room. And they've got the 65 days to present something, get it on the agenda, and we can make that call right there. And one of those options, I assume at that point, would be we either like what we see, we'll pay to see another card, or we don't, or nothing shows up and the lease is terminated on that day by a decision then.
Carl, would you be willing to make a motion with that verbiage? I see the verbiage is pretty much there except for the time frame.
Yeah, I get my machine fired up here again. So I would move, I'm scrolled down in the lease, of course.
Page 80 is the proposed motion.
Thank you. Sorry, thank you. So I move that we authorize staff to issue notice of default to KCXP Investments LLC for failure to meet the construction requirements of their lease, and to notify them that if this breach is not cured by the time of the, is it the agenda date?
The January meeting, and I don't have the date in front of me.
If the breach is not cured by the deadline to agendize, well, I should say, by the January meeting date of the authority, where this matter will be agendized, so approximately 65 days from today, the lease will be terminated.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye?
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. I'm turning back the gavel.
Quick question for our legal counsel, Steve. If I were to point out two factual matters about this lease that was just discussed, again, factual, not opinion, not influencing, would that be okay?
Yes, certainly. I mean, the vote's already been taken at this point.
Okay, that's fine.
You could
I'm
either
not,
tell-
I'm not, I just want to make clear, I'm not trying to sway any opinion. They're just facts in this lease. One of them has to do with future leases going forward. And I happen to know this lease very well because I assigned it to the party that's in default.
Right.
So one of the items that's in here, and we need to take note of this going forward on other leases, is Section 3, subsection B, page 1 of the lease. There is a $12,000 per acre utilities infrastructure fee that's to be paid by whoever develops the parcel. So when we look at other leases, if there are utilities that were brought in by the airport, like this one, we need to make sure that the party who takes a lease that's benefiting from our work is paying that fee. So just a point of reference there. Another point of reference I want to make, you discussed the difference between the market rate and the lease rate today and the amount of term left on this lease. The one thing that was omitted from that portion of the discussion is today's leases typically have, and correct me if I'm wrong, a 7-year mark-to-market provision.
I think it's 15.
Okay,
15
15. This lease does not have that.
Right.
So there is other value in this lease if it were to be assigned to an S&E.
Yeah, on the $12,000, you're exactly right about that. What happened there is with actually a brilliant idea from Neil Weaver, we offered a lease to a tenant in return for building the infrastructure on the lease. It was to Ted Contry for building the sewer and water. And at the time, we discussed, look, we need to recover these costs in addition. And so everyone who built along the taxiway Bravo, and these utilities come from Bravo down toward Charlie, everyone who hooks up to those utilities needs to pay the $12,000 infrastructure fee. And so that's a good reminder, because if we continue to lease property in that direction, if it's going to be tied into the utilities that we put in, then that's appropriate.
Quick follow-up then to the second point the chairman called our attention to, CPI adjustment. Indeed, this lease has a 2-year anniversary adjustment. Have we been adjusting it on that schedule?
It's hard to say about the complete history of it, but I have been implementing the CPI schedule as scheduled. It's only happened once since I've been here, but and there will be another CPI increase. It happens every other year, so almost all the leases are on a 2-year schedule. I'm not sure if this was a part of the one last year, but if it was implemented last year. Prior to that, I can't really speak to it.
Gotcha. I would imagine at this point, Corey, you've probably, I don't know how we'd have done this in the past, but have taken a spin through all these leases. And I don't know how we keep this straight, but it seems if we don't do this already, for you as the manager to have like a matrix that has sort of, on the board, the weird points of different leases and the kind of reminder on those.
This one, Carl, is really easy to figure out. Corey and I can figure this out offline, because there is another lease that's married to this one with the date of the
Oh, I just
lease.
figure that we probably have at any given time, even if we're doing an excellent job going forward of making things uniform, there's always some exceptions, right? So
Yeah.
just a handy way for us to, with high fidelity and efficiency, keep track of all those differences.
Okay, well, thank you for allowing me to point those things out. We're going to move on to item number 2 of our public hearings for discussion and possible action, approving the ground lease to Arrowhead Tenant LLC for the construction of aircraft storage hangars north of the fuel island along Taxiway Bravo, being a portion of parcel number 005-01101, approximately 1.7 acres, as set forth in the legal description and diagram filed with the Airport Authority. So I will let Steve and Corey take it away.
I'll start with it. Okay, so per NRS 476, chapter or 496, excuse me, the Airport Authority has the ability to lease property for aircraft storage, not full FBO, but aircraft storage, so long as it's based on a current appraisal, and we don't have to go through the request for bids, resolution, minimum rates, all that stuff. We can go directly to a lease. And so this property has been appraised. The appraisal value is 32 cents per square foot per year. And we got an application received, which I believe is in your packet, from Arrowhead Tenant LLC, which is Mr. Ward Chilton and one other partner who are the members of that LLC. It's, as you say, it's 1.7 acres. They propose to build 3 large corporate hangars. They've provided you with renderings of the hangars and a layout of the parcel. And we have worked with their counsel, Jim Morgan, who's also here tonight, through the model lease. And they've had reasonable corrections or changes to that lease, which we've made. We're trying to be careful to stick as closely as possible to the version of the model lease that's approved by the DA. But I believe that the modifications we made, which are very minor, will be okay with the DA. So essentially, it's our model lease. It's a 50-year lease, allows them to do aircraft storage, and as an FBO, because they have a direct lease, they can do hangar rental or sublease hangars to other people, just as any other hangar project can do. Let me see what else. I don't, you know, this is, I have to say, you know, we've seen so many requests to build hangars. This is probably the cleanest application I've seen. It's well constructed. It's clear that their engineer knows what he's doing and put together good engineering documents. It's clear that their attorney knows what he's doing and has made sensible changes to the lease. And in addition, they have provided to us on a confidential basis proof of financial capability, which candidly is stronger, much stronger than the last lease proposal that we had received. And so if you have questions for me, I'm happy to answer them, but candidly, this is a pretty straight up project and application. I don't know if the airport manager has something to add.
You covered just about everything. I'll just add that throughout this process, the potential tenant, has been really easy to work with. They were able to provide everything that we needed very quickly, sometimes with short notice, and it's been really pleasure to work with them. They've definitely provided everything that they need to accomplish this today.
I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Mr. Chilton and his advisors and counsel for being here this evening. And if I could make an example of the award, I'd like to do so. We've developed a process to lease land here at the airport. It was well thought out, simple, very expeditious, not difficult. Try to make it as simple as possible. And what a contrast this is compared with the last proposal we received to lease land. I want to thank you and your staff and your team for putting this together, putting some thought process into it, spending some money, and just getting this going, because it's what we need to approve this, and it's what Carson City needs as a municipality to approve it at their level, that you have really, done everything you need to do, which, again, we made a simple process. You've done it all. We appreciate it. Corey, do you want to go through the slide presentation real quick for members of the Airport Authority and members of the public?
Sure. So if y'all take a look at the TVs, we have some images. There's some good renderings of the proposed development. You can see it's 3 different hangars. 2 of them are 100 by 100, and the third one is just over 6,000 square feet. I don't remember the exact number. A little bit smaller. You can see the smaller one there. This will be just north of the fuel farm, east of Taxiway Bravo. This is overlaid over a map, but it is kind of hard to see it. They have plenty of room set back for aircraft, which they demonstrate there in front of their hangars. We have some different angles of it. These are really thought out. You can see there's the personnel access right next to the main hangar door. You'll also see there's vehicle access on the back side of the hangars here. I really like the design of the vehicle access being in the back. That's going to make it to where the vehicles are not a conflict with the aircraft in the front of the hangars. You can kind of see where the fuel farm is in this image.
Can I have you stop there for a moment, Corey?
Yep.
I have to do a self-serving moment for the fuel storage facility and this project. Which one of you gentlemen is the project engineer? Okay. When you're looking at that slide, if you will, there is a slope to the south. And I just want to make you aware of it. So the water slopes, it just moves. We see it right now on the ramp. And it, when there's snow or rain, it moves. There is a corrugated drain at the intersection of the property and Taxiway Bravo, but we have to be careful with water movement because, as you well know, at this time of year, that water turns to ice, and then we have a safety issue out there. So I just want to point that out. We need some mitigation measure so that we don't have an entire hardscape moving towards Taxiway Delta.
Is that working?
I hope so.
Yeah, Mark Rotter with Manhart Consulting. Yeah, I understand completely what you're talking about, and what we've provided is a couple of retention areas that will run the flow off of this site into those retention areas. There still will be overflow in large 100-year type events, but we'll be handling the minor events that the city requires. So.
I'm just pointing it out to you. That's all.
Yeah, no, I
figure
I'm very
if we don't
very
do it now, it might never happen.
very familiar with the property and very
Okay, good.
familiar with how it works. You bet.
Good.
Thank you.
You can kind of see how they have a retention area on the southeast side of the development here. They have integrated that into this early plan here. Overall, it's a really good looking development. There's going to be some really nice hangars to have in the airport. And as you can see from the images, the type of aircraft they're going to accommodate are really nice as well, which is a big benefit to the airport in the city. And that's all of that.
I think it's just a fantastic project, and again, we can't begin to thank you enough for the detail and the time and attention that you folks have put into this application. Really just a fantastic job, makes everybody's life here a lot easier. Any questions or comments from members of the Airport Authority? Harlow?
Mr. Chairman, I think this is a wonderful development for the airport. We had a number of false starts and some difficulty getting going on that Bravo property after having made considerable investment in it ourselves. And so I think this is a wonderful step forward.
Carl?
Yeah, well, I'll first off, second what Harlow said. This is awesome, and thanks for making the investment in the airport and getting yourself some great hangars in the process. I had a question that I was asking to Steve before the meeting, and I noted with delight that you have, in a baked-in way, done your part to put the little slice of roadway along the property line sitting to the east of these proposed hangars, which is very much appreciated because one day that will run out all the way to Arrowhead, and I'm sure there'll be another access gate up there. Now, until that happens, since we're, I don't believe asking you to build a road all the way to Arrowhead, I presume then that the access to these hangars will be per, I mean, I know in the narrative it says per the airport interior roadway network, which is a very sophisticated way of saying driving across Bravo. And I presume that that's what we're doing in this for the meantime, as other developments are so served. And I'll just ask sort of the diligence question to you, Corey. This new development that utilizes the same interior roadway network is not something that the FAA has. This doesn't tickle some threshold of that kind of activity for them. That would be my question.
It's a great question. We haven't asked the FAA that question yet. There will be a Section 163 application related to this development, and that'll take place after they get the approval. The FAA will make comments on that sort of thing at that time. This development clearly is planning for future access, and I think that is going to really work in their favor, for sure.
If I might, then one other question to Ward and to Mark, or to you, Corey, and Steve, who've been working on this. I note that there is awareness shown on the drawings of the future taxi lane into the fee simple property, the SERPA property, quote unquote, now the CTE property, just to the north of your project. Was the existence of that taxi lane what sort of put the bounding box on what you're proposing to do? And is that the taxi lane that was recorded or sort of agreed prior to the CTE purchase of that land? So I
Yeah,
guess
Mark
first to
Roderick.
Mark,
Yeah,
was that seen as a bounding condition of what you wanted to do?
That's correct, Carl. We did, we took the center line of the taxi lane and then set back, and that created that north boundary. That's the way we did it. Took that from the airport layout plan. And
Great.
also, I'll point out, you mentioned the roadway. If you look on the airport layout plan, they didn't actually extend the roadway behind this parcel, but we felt that that made sense.
Yeah.
Just for the point that you made, being able to access ultimately all the way to Arrowhead.
Yeah, no, that's really appreciated, and thanks for the clarification on that. I assumed that that's why, why the northern boundary is where the northern boundary is. It's nice to see you use the space really efficiently for some, meaningful additions to the airport, and looks like you were able to do everything or most of what you wanted to do then in the space that was already
Yeah.
designated.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Thanks, Carl.
You bet.
Mr. Chairman? Yes, sir. Carl and I may be talking about the same thing, but as you recall, we designated certain through-the-fence access points to the fee simple property.
Yep.
And that may be what Carl was saying, but I just wanted to,
Let me address that, because that's so we have clarification.
okay.
I specifically worked with our council and Corey on that exact matter. And if you look carefully at the slide that's up in front of you, you'll see there is a line to the north of the proposed property boundary, and it says taxi lane. And that was the result of the memorandum of understanding we entered into.
Yeah, that was my question.
Yep.
So we don't have a conflict between
That's
the
an
two.
access point.
We have no conflict. That was the access point that Mike Vione had agreed to with us and entered into a memorandum of understanding on behalf of the property. It's also on our ALP. And so we had, these agreed upon designated access points. So this does not interfere with that. Any other comments or questions? Members of the public, does anyone care to speak to this matter? Well, seeing no other comments from airport authority members nor the public comment, I would propose that we approve this development and move forward with a lease. I would move personally that we approve the ground lease to Arrowhead Tenant LLC for the construction of aircraft storage hangars as proposed and presented to the airport authority this evening. Okay, we have a motion and a second. So the motion is to approve the ground lease to Arrowhead Tenant LLC for construction of aircraft storage hangars as proposed and presented to us this evening. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Point of clarification for the applicant. So we'll need you to work closely with our legal counsel and with our airport manager for an interim period, because while we approve it, it still has to go to the Board of Supervisors for their approval, and it has to go through the district attorney's office.
We have the finalized lease document that we worked through with Mr. Morgan here, so maybe we can capture some signatures before they leave tonight.
I'll tell you what we're going to do then. Why don't we take a quick 5-minute break?
Okay.
That way we can let the applicant be on their way after we get some signatures. And we'll recess. We'll make it 7 minutes. We'll come back at 5:55. Okay? We are back in session, and we're moving on to public hearing item number 3 for discussion and possible action, adoption of a resolution and notice of invitation to bid for Carson City Airport, the lease located at 4331 Gonai Road. This is formerly referred to as the Shade Tree Aviation Building. It's approximately 25,000 square feet of property as described in the legal description and ramp diagram. We need to establish some appropriate minimum lease rates, terms of lease, permitted uses, and we need to consider how we want to facilitate this. Do we want to do a sale of the building with a lease of the land, or do we want to lease the building as it stands today? We need to set a deadline for bids and the date for the bid opening and consideration pursuant to Nevada Revised Statute 244.283. We've had an extensive appraisal performed, and we have a summary of that appraisal, which Corey is going to put up on the monitor, I believe, for us, or he has a handout for us, one of the two. There we go. Without going through the 100-page appraisal, I figured everybody would benefit from looking at this as we were having this discussion. And Corey, take it away.
Okay, so this item, I think it's best for Takis to go ahead and start it off, but I do have some comments on it as well.
Okay, so as you know, at your last meeting, we kind of put the concept in front of you and you decided you wanted to look at two different types of options that would be available to you. Someone who wanted to purchase the hangar and lease the ground lease at the ground lease rate, or someone who wanted to lease the hangar and ground as an improved property. The prior tenant, Shade Tree, was leasing it from us as an improved property. Unlike aircraft storage hangars, the statute requires that you adopt a resolution, you set a time period for bids, a closing date for bids, an opening date for when you open the bids, and you award the bid if there's multiple bids. Or even if there's one bid, you still award it. But and so that's the statute that the chairman referred to just a minute ago. It's in your briefing. And so what we did is Corey and I put together a draft resolution and notice of invitation for bids following the statutory form. As you can see from the appraisal, the appraiser, and this is like a little bit more complicated than the usual appraisals we get. Usually we're just getting unimproved ground lease appraisals. But the appraisal came out for if it was leased as an improved property, in other words, we're doing a lease for the land area and the building that exists there, it would be $6,600 per month. If we're doing a sale and a lease, the lease rate drops to $1,000 a month, but they would have to purchase the hangar for $1.3 million. And so we drafted a resolution to do that, but this is really your opportunity to tinker with the things that we took our best shot at, and so you can make sure they reflect what you really think you want to do. And among those, I'll just mention a few and then kick it to Corey. Actually, I should mention one other thing too. So besides the resolution, we've also done a sample lease as lease terms. And what we've done is we've taken the model lease from the DA's office that we had approved through the DA's office, and we modified it for FBO services. When we put it together, we put in all FBO services under Title 19. But candidly, I think you should probably think about that a bit. That parcel does not lend itself to a fuel facility or sales of fuel. And so maybe that shouldn't be included. If you tell me don't include it, I'll take that out. And also, I think you should indicate what your preference is on that parcel. I know from reading the minutes from the last meeting, I'd forgotten it was Member Hamilton who said, what we really need on this field is an aircraft repair shop because those are really thin. And so if that's your preference, great. We should say in the proposal, preference will be given to aircraft repair or whatever it is that you think would be best suited there or most needed by the airport. And then I think that's about all I have. I know that Corey has some other ideas because we've talked about some other options that you may want to consider as well in terms of the size of the lease.
Thank you, Takis. So one thing that I identified here is that the parcel was originally designed whenever Gonai Road was in a different location, and a part of that parcel is actually a parking lot. I think that we should consider accepting bids that are leasing land, but maybe not the entire parcel as it is laid out today. Because that may not, the parcel the way it's laid out today may not actually be what someone leasing that building for today would want or need. So I think the board should consider making a modification to this to accept bids for essentially if the tenant wants a different layout of ramp space, we should consider that. And that's the primary thing that I wanted to add to that.
Okay, let me open this up.
Before you do, can I just add something to that? The appraisal would allow us to do that because the appraisal does give us a per square footage appraisal. I would also note, I actually learned to fly out of that hangar. At least that's where the flight school was. This was like 25 years ago. And at the time, you could actually drive down from Gonai Road to the parking lot on the outside, and that's kind of where they had their parking lot. But when we reconstructed Gonai Road and made it straight and flatter and did all those good things that we did, we pretty much cut off that access. And so what used to be a driveway in a parking lot is really on the outside of the fence. And so I understand what Corey's saying. Why would someone want to lease that?
Yeah, I think the gate is still there too.
There's still a man gate. It's really covered heavily with brush, but it's.
I remember when the actual vehicular gate was there. I
Could
haven't
we-
looked at that in years.
Could we put up page 227? Because that, I think, will be helpful for the conversation. That's the one that has the Atkins map.
Yeah, but it'll take me just a second.
While you're doing that, Corey, I'm going to open this up for discussion. Harlow, you're always one that's short on words. Do you have anything for us?
Well, I'm not quite sure what to say. I think I'd sort of like to hear the back and forth about leasing as opposed to selling.
Okay.
And I think I would need that input before I would be prepared for myself to decide one way or the other. I haven't actually done a calculation on the future value, of that money received now versus lease payments over the term of 50 years, and what our obligations would be with respect to the property as far as maintenance costs and that sort of thing over time, which would work out best for us. I think, personally, I would be for whatever would be most advantageous to the airport. And I'm not sure which one that is. That's why I'd like to hear some more discussion about it from some of you folks that are maybe a little more attuned to that.
I think that's pretty fair. Carl, what's your opinion of this?
Well, I did my diligence, as my long-lost friend Michael Golden asked me to do in my absence last month, and it seems that there was a bit of spirited conversation around this subject that led to our being on this week, I think, this month. Thank you, by the way, for pulling that up. And I think some of the issues around being a landlord of a building, I think Treasurer Rogers had surfaced maybe some of those concerns, and maybe others as well, or maybe I have that off. But it got me thinking about it. And I think that those are meaningful questions as we think about management of the property if we did continue to own the hangar and the building and lease it. Corey and team have a little bit of a additional job scope in the sense that we now are tending to a tenant and their needs and their gripes about the facility, which I haven't, to be honest with you, done a thorough walkthrough of that building in a very long time. I think there were some questions raised that are good ones around, do we or don't we, or would the buyer have code compliance matters to take care of? Not necessarily just because it changed hands. I mean, I think that that's a question though, against Carson City code. So I think to Harlow, one of the questions that, you're asking and something to think about is, on one hand, what are the obligations and the burden for us to manage a building as a landlord? And on the other hand, how long might it sit empty if someone has to pay $1.2 million for that building? So I think those are the considerations that jump out for me as far as what is going to be in the best interest of the airport. Are we ready to take that on as a property manager?
I guess there might be one attendant question as well. It seemed to me in the past that when we had a chance to sell something, for example, we always filtered that through the lens of the acquisition of federal funds. And, I don't know how much money, the feds are offering of late, to airports like ours. But we do have some major airport capital improvement, type programs that we are interested in. We've been talking about creative ways to lengthen the runway, perhaps, making the airport more attractive, and thereby possibly increasing our revenue posture. If we were to sell this facility and relieve ourselves of the burden of management and had that money up front, would it do us any good in terms of acquiring federal funds in the near term rather than the long term to accomplish some important capital projects on the airport?
Yeah, I see some merit there. I'm going to take the opportunity to opine as we move down the row here of participants. My opinion is we ought to put this out to bid with both options. See what the market brings. It's, why limit ourselves? Let's see what the see what the market bears. That's my opinion. Tim? Okay.
Well, I don't think there's nothing mystic about managing a property. You can subcontract it out if you don't want to do it yourself. I would be opposed to selling the property myself. I just think the long-term potential still gives you a lot of things you can do. That's my opinion.
Well, I think we're going to know a lot more if we put this out to bid and we see what people are willing to pay for it and we see what people are ready to rent it for. And the other thing is too, is if we end up renting this out, a lot of times in the contract, you can have a lot of the maintenance borne by the people who are renting it. So I think we can minimize our need to manage this too much by appropriate contract for rental. So I don't think we can do a whole lot of thinking as far as renting or selling until we really see what the market bears. So I'm interested in that, and we're really open to both of those based on, I think we're going to know more once we get there. So.
Tim? Oh.
I can add a couple of things. So the fire marshal has confirmed that it would not need sprinklers, which, as long as the use of the building doesn't change from what it was previously. The intention is for this to be the same type of facility that it was before. We've also identified about $50,000 worth of improvements that were in the previous quote that the airport could accomplish. That brings the airport's upfront costs down to probably less than $150,000, where it was originally expected to be around $300,000. It makes it a lot easier to do, that's for sure. And then also the appraisal is different from the last board meeting. At the last board meeting, that was a draft appraisal. We have the final appraisal, the summary of it, here today. And those rates, we went over the numbers at the last board meeting. The rates are a lot better for the airport, really in both scenarios, but it does weigh a little bit better towards leasing than the previous assessment did.
Thanks, Corey. And Steve, you have something to say?
Wanted to say something for the benefit of the audience. Okay, so ordinarily the airport authority leases bare land, and the person who leases it builds and owns the hangar that's on it. And so the unusual situation that we're talking about here is where we have a piece of property that already has a hangar on it. So the question is, do we rent it as is, as an improved property with a hangar? Or do we rent it as the same way our other leases appear, which is we're basically doing a ground lease and somebody else owns the hangar? And I don't know if that's helpful in explaining the discussion that's going on, but that's the difference between buying the hangar and leasing the ground versus leasing it as an improved property. I just thought that might be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, that's good to point that out. This is one of my pet projects, quite honestly. And thank you, Corey, for doing so much diligence. It's been our airport manager's done a significant amount of diligence based on required, bringing the building to code, what a purchaser or a leaseor could expect from us, what our requirements would be, and that was a big undertaking. Thank you. We got the appraisals. We should not make a decision until we get the bids in, but I'm looking forward to having the airport authority put this out to bid for either lease or sale. And I think that the provision about that unusable land is a valid one. It should be an option for someone to opt out of it or blah, 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 if it harms our overall program. But I'm pretty excited. I look at I personally favor trying to hang on to it and leasing the entire place. And we can do so, hopefully, if we get it approved by the city, to have a net lease where majority of the maintenance is factored into the responsibility of the tenant. But that's something that we have to get, again, I never assume what we can do being a city owned operation. So we have to look at all that.
Yeah, let me just respond to that. The model lease that the DA has approved for us requires the maintenance to be done by the tenant, irrespective of whether we're selling the building or leasing it.
Good.
So the maintenance is already on the tenants.
So that's in
thing.
our favor as far as I'm
Yeah.
concerned. So my point is, let's get this darn thing out to bid, and let's because right now we're losing a lot of dough every month sitting there while we wait. We got to get this going, and we have people on this airport that want to lease that right now. FBO people right now that would love to lease that building and start using it for FBO services. And I think we should really expedite this. That's my 2 cents. Yes,
Question. Just as a follow-up, Steve, with regard to the way the model lease is written when it contemplates a facility, I mean, the tenant is still not on the hook for envelope maintenance. I mean, we have to keep the roof watertight. We have to, I mean, it's no different than any typical triple net lease that I'd be familiar with, right? I mean, as the landlord, we do still have to, not have it fall down on them, right?
That's not the way I drafted the lease. I mean, I understand what you're saying, and I'm very familiar with most triple net leases. And generally speaking, there's a split, where the landlord is required for certain structural things like the roof, the walls, the windows, the doors. The DA version of the lease just says the tenant's responsible for the maintenance. And so my expectation is the tenant would do their own inspection of the building and decide whether or not it's in suitable condition, and they'll go forward from there. There's nothing to prohibit a bidder from coming in saying, okay, we're willing to accept it, but you got to make the following improvements to it so that we can accept it in this shape. That would certainly be okay as well.
But Corey, it's great to hear that you have taken the diligence on this to this level. That number, I think I heard you say $150,000. I mean, that's a ballpark for the improvements or repairs that we think we would need to make before it was leased.
I think that if it was leased, we could expect some expenses around there to get that building pretty much ready to go. That a lot of that expense is actually reducing liability more than improvements. So it's not necessarily expenses that would have to be incurred, but that is a worst case scenario if we did everything.
And you might find a tenant saying, basically, I want the same set of things done as a TI, effectively, as a condition of lease. So it's great that we have a sense of that. In the sort of lease or sell debate, I didn't mean to suggest that that the handling of this as a landlord would be onerous, but just something that we want to, as you guys have done, have our head around. I'm very much in concurrence with Member Hamilton around what I'd like to see go in there. I mean, I would love that there would be an aviation maintenance, avionics, whatever it may be, option going in there. And just to that end, I think that's going to be a much more palatable approach if someone has the opportunity to lease a building than if there was a $1.3 million nut they have to put down just to get going. So, I think that if we can figure it, the idea of going out and testing the market with the option, of course, is one way to do it. We don't have to necessarily accept a sale offer if we decide that we want it to be a lease. I would ask one other quick question. In the diagram that we see up on our screens, is the bounding box with the extra space that has had all sorts of interesting vehicles on it over time to the south of the hangar, the piece that we'd be talking about giving the option to not lease? Or are you talking about yet a different space to the west of the building that's not delineated on this map?
So I think that we should consider what's in the best interest of the tenant. So that space could potentially be used. They could develop on that space. There's enough room there to put another hangar.
But that is the space you're talking about. It's not, it is that piece to the south of the building, right?
Piece to the south and to the west. There's not much west of it, but there is space to the west that's included.
But it's where that line is on this diagram?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, nothing beyond that.
The fence line is actually right in the middle of the hangar. It's a line kind of on there.
Where that line dives into the, yeah.
It's about right here. So everything west of this is actually behind a fence, which could be useful for a future tenant, but it may not be also.
Well, I'd like to
Mr.
hear-
Chairman, I
Yes.
have one other question maybe for Corey. Another filter we tend to run everything through is what does the ADO think? They control the purse strings on our federal money. Do they have an opinion about what airports do with property that they acquire upon the expiration of a lease?
So the FAA considers each airport individually, but there is a grant assurance that specifically states that an airport needs to be as self-sufficient as possible. Meaning if an airport has an option to make money and they choose not to, the airport could potentially be in fault of our grant assurance requirement. So any decision the airport would make, there would have to be a defense to this is why we did this option over the other. And we'd have to prove that it is in fact the best way for us to be as self-sufficient as possible. And there are considerations for each airport, but that would be a factor. And I think in this case, leasing the building is more financially beneficial to the airport.
So, I mean, perhaps that supports requesting bids for either or.
That's what we're saying. That's what we ought to be looking at.
Yeah, but in the event the airport accepts one over the other, the airport needs to be able to have an answer to why we chose that option and why that option is the best for the airport.
If we limit ourselves to one as opposed to the other, then we don't really know how to answer that.
Again, that's why we're suggesting we go out to bid.
Yeah.
Any members from the public have any comment they'd like to add to this discussion? If so, please come on up to introduce yourself. Yeah, please state your name and who Yeah, please state your name, who you are, and give us your comment.
Hi, Tom Eberly. A question on your bidding process, is that,
Is it green? There you go.
oh, there we go. On your bidding process, how does that work? You get bids and then you evaluate those bids, and those are not necessarily, doesn't go to the highest bidder.
Not necessarily, and we have the option to reject all bids.
Right.
We reserve that right.
Do you have an outline of what you look for in a bid?
That's what we're moving towards right now.
Okay. All right,
So-
perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
I do think, Tom, that we did mention that an FBO operation is preferable from the board's point of view, repair, maintenance, blah,
Yeah,
blah, blah,
right.
because that services more of our users and
Sure.
our tenants, but that's not to say that that's going to be what we accept.
Yeah, right.
It was just
Yeah, we'll,
pointed out.
we'll look at all options, but consideration would be given to an FBO.
Yeah.
Maintenance provider.
Right. Okay,
So-
thank you.
Anyone else from the public care to come on up? If you could introduce yourself.
My name's Rick Freeworth. I live up the road there, and I just learned how to fly, and I soloed, so, I'm more interested in the airport now. Other than that, I have really no interest in buying or leasing this property, or just as a curiosity, okay? But from a financial perspective on this thing, it seems to be if you got to put 150 grand in to get it to the point where it's either sellable or leasable, if you're going to lease it and you're going to get the full 6,600 a month, that's going to take 2.5 to 3 years to recover your investment in getting it up to speed. So that means you're going to be out of pocket for 3 years if you choose to just do the lease thing. So if you sold it for $1.3 million, to me, I'm not at all familiar with the cost and all that kind of stuff in the airport, within the airport boundaries. I'm sure they have, they're more costly in some ways, but a 25,000 square foot building for $1.3 million, man, I'd sell those all day. It's a steel frame building. Are you kidding me? My God, look at, the guys advertising metal buildings. Build those all over the airport and sell them, and let's all retire. That's a lot of them.
It's a 25,000 square foot parcel with a 10,000 square foot building on it.
Wow.
Yeah, but
So-
still,
right?
Yeah.
That's a lot of money. And I, so I just wanted to say I'm kind of like a newbie to this whole thing, so to get those things out. It seems to me, though, from the triple net lease standpoint, you could say that you're going to give them an allowance of the $150,000 rather than spend it out of your own pocket, that kind of thing. If you acknowledge the fact that there's something wrong with the building to get it up to code, then, and this is what your guesstimate is, to throw it on them. They're going to want to make changes to the building anyway.
well, thank you.
Anyways,
thank you.
Thank you
That's
for your
it.
comment and congratulations.
Yeah.
Okay. What's the pleasure of the airport authority on this?
Well, I propose to make a motion, if I could.
Please.
I move to approve the draft resolution and notice of invitation to bid for the 4331 Gonai Road project with a deadline for bids of, what would you suggest?
I put January 12th in here so that we would have them in time for the January 18th
Okay.
meeting, if that is
All
the
right.
correct date for the
For a
meeting.
deadline for bids of January 12th, and for the bid opening and consideration of, what would be the right date for that?
I'm just checking right now. Yeah, 18th.
January 18th.
Yeah.
Second.
I'll second it, Tim.
Wait, can I ask a question about your bid, given your motion? Do you also want to indicate a preference for aviation maintenance? And do you also want to give the option that Corey had talked about earlier of allowing bidders to bid on a smaller than the entire area?
Well, I definitely think that would be, personally, I think that would be appropriate to include that in the bid notice.
Okay,
Yes, both.
okay,
And so I'd make that part of my
okay, great,
motion,
great, thank you.
for that verbiage to be tacked on to the end of it.
Okay.
Hey, we got a second.
Yeah, I second that. Okay. All in favor to approve the draft resolution and notice of invitation to bid for
Real quick question. Sorry, just before we do that, Mr. Chairman. Just since I may have missed something, the business of the maintenance that we talked about,
Uh-huh.
is that baked in here into the kind of terms that we'd be announcing so that people could contemplate that or know upfront what our opening intention is?
My plan would be to put a preference will be given to that use in here.
Excuse me, I don't mean that piece. We just heard Vice Chair Pulis say that. I mean, responsibilities to the tenant for maintenance of the building, given that what we just talked about a little earlier is a little different than certainly I've leased a lot of buildings, anything I've ever seen. Would that be in the bid offering this clarification that basically you're responsible, for net lease, right? You're responsible for
Right.
everything.
In other words, the triple net lease.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that
Beyond
would,
a triple net lease.
I think that would be smart to include in the resolution.
Yeah,
Is that,
absolutely, Carl.
is that part of your motion?
I thought that
Mr.
was
Vice-
assumed, I thought that would be
Okay.
part of the verbiage,
Okay.
assuming that, because.
Well,
as you
the
said
model
earlier-
lease will be included as a exhibit as the part of the offering, right?
Correct,
Okay.
correct. But I think we should also mention it in the resolution, because you're right, it's different than a lot of triple net leases.
Yeah.
The only other question that I just wanted to get feedback on, positive or negative, I don't care, is do you include fuel sales in here? Or should we limit it to the other FBO services, aircraft sales, flight schools, all the
I
other
think we
stuff?
should just leave that alone, just personally. I don't think that we need to get it that much into the weeds.
Well, we have to describe what they're permitted to do. That's one of the terms in the lease.
Yeah,
And
but-
the way I've drafted it in, I've listed everything that's under Title 19 as an FBO, and that includes fuel sales. And that's the only one that I think is a little bit of an odd button, because
It's nebulous because the area isn't there for them to do. In other
Right.
words, they don't have a physical plant
so
to do
maybe
fuel
it does,
sales.
maybe it doesn't matter whether it's in or out then.
I don't think it matters.
Yeah,
I don't
okay.
think it matters. They'd never get approval of it, so.
Are we jumping the gun as far as some of our minimums? Or are we going to be used as far as when the bid goes out, are we going to be giving some minimums of,
We
you know,
can accept-
1.3 million for the building or anything
We
like
can
that?
accept or reject any or all. We don't have to even have.
All bids, so we're not going to have any minimums in there.
Our bid should include the
There.
appraisal.
Required by law to have minimums, and the minimums are the appraised
Appraisals.
values. And,
Resolution.
but what we'll do is we'll break those appraised values down to the per square foot number, so that if somebody comes in and says, yeah, I don't want to lease this little strip behind or the part next to it, I can't really use those, then they can still give us a meaningful number that you guys can consider.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to approve the draft resolution and notice of invitation to bid for 4331 Gonai Road with a deadline for bids of, remind me, January 12th, and the date of bid opening and consideration of January 16th, 18th. Okay, and Tim, can you remind me what's at the very end of that resolution? We were making a small modification to it.
We're
Consideration would be given to a tenant.
Preference for
Preference for
aviation maintenance.
FBO services.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Corey, could I give you a little bit of direction on this?
Sure.
We've got to get this out beyond the local market. So I don't know what avenue you would choose, but there is interest in the airport from outside the local area. And as such, we've got to get this particular request for proposal out and cast a wide net. So there is interest out there. Let's make sure we attract it.
Sounds good.
Okay, I don't know how to do it. I'm sure you do.
Yeah.
Okay. Onwards and upwards, folks. We are moving on to item number 4. Discussion and possible action, review and approve a draft request for qualifications, also known as an RFQ, for legal services. Steve and Corey, you want to discuss this and brief everyone on the airport authority about this?
Yes. So, first of all, I noticed the bookmark in the PDF points to the wrong page. This is on page 231. So this item is the review and approval for draft request for qualifications for legal services. This is coming up because our current legal counsel has notified us that their rates will be increasing in January of 2023. By completing the RFQ, we can determine whether these new rates are feasible and if there are any other alternatives that are in line with our obligations to the residents of Carson City. We have a duty to ensure that we're being fiscally responsible with our expenses, and by completing this RFQ, we can determine for certain what these rates, what we should be paying for these services. A little bit more information on it. So our current legal counsel has been with us in some form or another since 1991. They've contributed greatly to the success of this airport over this period of time. The current rate was established back in 2010, and the new proposed rate is an increase of 58% per hour. That does exceed the consumer price index for that period, which was approximately 37%. The new rate is still an 11% discount over the regular rate that legal counsel typically charges. So it's still a discounted rate for the airport. And so this item, we have to make sure we're being responsible. But this is not in any way a negative reflection on our current council. This has gone out to requests for qualifications in the past, and the airport didn't receive anyone who is qualified. We're very lucky to have the legal counsel that we do. So I don't want this to come off in any way as any sort of negative about our current legal counsel. Included is the draft for the request for qualifications. It is in the board packet, and hopefully you all have reviewed that. I believe that this covers everything that we would need from legal counsel, but this is a good opportunity for y'all to provide input if you feel like there should be anything additional in here or anything that should be removed. And that is all that I have for the review of the item. Please let me know if y'all have any questions.
Steve, do you have anything you'd like to add to this?
I'd only mention one thing. I did look at this. I think Corey did a great job putting it together. I think it's pretty comprehensive. The one thing as I'm sitting here that it needs like a deadline for responses. But I don't think that's a big deal. I know that Corey can come up with something on that. And beyond that, I think it's a really good and healthy idea. You should periodically be looking at anybody who works, does contract work for the authority, and periodically see what else is out there. Who knows? Maybe there's someone who is even more perfect for the job than some might think that I am. And that's okay with me. I want what's best for the airport. I'm happy to just fly my airplane, actually.
Perfect? Is that what you said?
I'd like
Or perfect.
I'd like to take an opportunity here before anybody else to make a few comments about this particular matter. None of us live forever. We all have an expiration date. And at some point, we all go. And we do different things in life. And we have different phases in life. There's going to be a day in the not so distant future where I will cease volunteering on the airport authority and turn it over to somebody else. There's going to be a day where our esteemed counsel, who is a close personal friend of mine, is going to just want to fly his airplane and isn't going to want to provide legal services to the airport anymore. I don't think that day has come, but at a minimum, we have to go through this exercise because we have to be prepared that things will change in the future. And Steve has participated in an extremely productive fashion with his time here on the Airport Authority for over 3 decades. And so I look at it as this is an exercise that we need to do. I don't find Steve's fee, that's, the change in fee, to be out of line with reality. In fact, I find it to be quite the bargain. And the reason being is twofold. Number one, my firm, we use a couple of different firms for legal services. They do different things for us. And that rate that Steve is quoting to the airport is discounted. We typically pay anywhere from $500 to $2,000 an hour, depending upon what we're doing with what attorney and what law firm and what task we've tasked them with. You don't see good legal counsel representation with a number 4 in front of it and 2 digits after it. I'll just point that out. The other thing is, let's say we do find someone who is willing to do this for maybe $350 an hour or $300 an hour. The amount of time that that particular person is going to have to take to get up to speed on everything we do as an airport authority will well exceed the cumulative amount that our current legal counsel bills us for in a given year. I'll point that out. There's a learning curve that the airport authority would undoubtedly have to pay for. And finally, I joke around with a couple of my friends who are attorneys. Being someone who used to be involved in legal practice, I always say, hey, if you want that $50 an hour attorney, you can always retain the courthouse custodian. On that note, I'll open it up to comment from other airport authority members.
I have one thing I'd like to add.
Yeah.
I think that the airport could consider accepting more than one bid. Maybe Takis, you can comment on that. If we're thinking about the future, it may be something to consider to get an additional legal counsel that could be trained and educated by our current legal counsel. I'm not sure if Takis would have to comment on the legalities of that. But if we did accept a lower dollar legal counsel with some experience, I don't think that necessarily needs to mean that we no longer use our current legal counsel. Something to think about.
Yeah, I think that's another option. I mean, the bottom line is, I'm not ready to go, but if you find somebody else who's good, I want you to take them, and I will spend time with them, bringing them up to speed in terms of the things that I know of and share the institutional information that I have. But I think that's another option too. Yeah. It's true. Any one of us could just drop dead tomorrow, and then where would you be? At least here now you've gone through the process. You know what's out there. You know what you're dealing with.
Yeah, and I'm not even suggesting that. I'm just saying that we all move on to different phases in our life. That's really what I was getting at. We move on to next chapters, and at some point, sometime, both of us are going to say, well, we've had enough of the airport authority. Let someone else do it, right? So, Paul.
Yeah, I just hope we don't get into the mode of paying someone half as much and taking up 4 times the amount of time to figure out what the deal is when he already knows that. But I really do think that maybe we do want to hire someone else to get them to train as we go, to take if he is a lower rate. But I mean the amount of value we have right now is I think that's going to be hard to beat.
We all know Steve's the expert. That's a given. I do like the idea of maybe having an assistant. I'm not sure how it would work. It'd have to be at a lower pay level, and the guy would have to understand he could be there for 2 or 3 more years before he took over. I think it makes sense to do it if we could find somebody that's interested.
Well, I think value comes in many forms. And I think what Paul said is quite true. I suppose in terms of due diligence, as counsel himself pointed out, that does not hurt, from time to time, to see what else is out there. But Steve's institutional knowledge and background at the airport it's incalculable, in terms of the value that it brings to our process. So whoever we got, at whatever price, it would be an awfully long time before they would have the background and the intuitive understanding of the airport that Steve has. So even if we had someone who came in at, I don't know, 350 or 400, I would have to really question whether there's true value, in that or not. If Steve feels that this, given the current climate that we're in economically, we're all feeling it, that if this increase is necessary in order to maintain par, then I think that's something that as far as this board member goes, I could understand. I wouldn't be opposed to going through the process, but I don't always think the lowest bidder is the most economical. So unless there was a really, really compelling case, I think it would be hard for me to be sold on a replacement, at marginally less cost, and then lose the institutional knowledge and background that are just irreplaceable, that would take years of experience to accumulate. So for me, it would have to be pretty doggone compelling. And it's hard for me to imagine that would be the case. I'm not even sure we would get anybody, to respond, but, we do have a responsibility to the people of Carson City to be wise stewards. And if we wanted to go through that process, we could, but for me, it would be very hard to convince me to take a different course.
Maybe I will jump in there. I think that beyond a duty of care to periodically run a process, which is what Harlow's alluding to, I think the real, for me, that I'd never really thought about until today, the real reason to do this would be succession planning. Not that I think Steve's going anywhere, to be very clear. I think that he is a spry guy who enjoys a vicarious life and is not short for this world. But I think it is interesting to be thinking about what Corey brings up. We're going to be at this for a long time, and because we acknowledge there's so much institutional knowledge and things to catch up on, that we would be advised to, in one way or another, have in the back of our minds, how do we start figuring out what the next generation looks like? Whether that's somebody from inside Kempfer Kroll, whether that's somebody from another firm. To Harlow's point, I don't even know what the spec looks like to go shop for this kind of counsel, particularly in a market like ours. I think that might be more telling than anything, and would show us that oh, we better start planning a long ways out and identifying somebody who can either come up to speed or, you're in a search where you may have to get lucky. So I think those are the reasons why I'm very happy that we're having this conversation and would be thoughtful about running a process. But I, like Harlow, would be hard pressed to make a switch. I think that the skill, the background, the history allows at whatever rate Mr. Takis to deploy his capabilities more efficiently from a time standpoint. So even if the rate goes up, as it needs to do over time, the amount of that you're going to use is going to be, I think, most efficient where we are. But glad we're having the chat. And I think that it's really prudent, Corey, to think about the long run.
Again, I think Steve does just an impeccable job for the airport authority. Thank you for all that you do. Your counsel is invaluable as far as I'm concerned. That said, though, we do need to do this, and I would suggest somebody put out a motion to, go with the RFQ that we've prepared.
I move to approve the draft request for qualifications and direct staff to proceed with the publication of the RFQ as provided.
And we want to put a deadline on that RFQ, Tim?
That would, before next meeting?
So January 12th?
We will be considering bids at the next meeting. Something to consider. If you wanted to wait until the next one.
No. Let's see if we can put it for the next, so the deadline would be the 12th of January.
We
You
can't
can
make
go ahead
that
and just use the same deadlines you're using
Yeah,
for the
Sure.
shade tree.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to publish the RFQ for legal counsel for the Carson City Airport Authority with a request that the qualifications come back to the airport no later than January 12th. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And our last action item for this evening, discussion and possible action consideration for a pay increase for airport operations technician. Go ahead, Corey.
Okay, so the Airport Authority approved a raise for Rick Lee in June of 2021. It has been over a year since that raise, and during that past year, the world has experienced a significant inflation. In order for the pay increase to be meaningful, the raise would need to exceed the recent increase of cost of living. The point of reference that I used was the Social Security cost of living adjustment of 8.7%, which will be taking place in January. I feel like a raise of 10% would increase, a raise of 10% would exceed the cost of living, indicating that we do in fact appreciate the work that Rick is doing, and he does deserve a raise. Comparatively, the new rate of $26.57 would be higher than a maintenance technician at Reno International, but this would also be lower than what an airport operations agent is making at Reno International. I believe that he deserves this raise because he has exceeded the requirements of his position. He provides a lot of capability by one individual, a lot more than I think a lot realize an airport could expect from a single maintenance technician. For example, the security improvements that he does, the landscaping that he does, which includes actual certification in herbicide and pre-emergent, and the airport improvement research that he does. At other airports, such as Reno, they have entire departments for each of these different items. We have one guy on staff who can do all of it for us. He has been doing some maintenance work on our vehicles, which are the one particular vehicle is aging pretty significantly. The work that he did on that vehicle is definitely outside of the scope that I would normally expect from an airport maintenance technician. And he saved us a lot of money by not having to bring that vehicle in to get repaired. I've already completed a performance review, so that's not what I'm here to do today. I'm here to ask y'all for the approval of my assessment. Please let me know if you'll have any questions.
I'll just make a comment, a question. Corey, I think this particular pay increase just puts him just about where our previous guy was 3 years ago. Am I mistaken?
I'm not aware of that rate.
I think that, because Rick came in less than the guy he replaced. And I think that we're, if not close, just a little bit more than what that person was then. And he's doing significantly more services for the airport than we had with our previous, and I think the world of him. And I favor this without question. I think that he is one of our best assets we have in the whole operation, in our whole airport.
Mr. Vice Chairman,
Yes.
I heartily agree.
Okay.
Rick is a very capable individual, dependable, works quietly, is congenial, and he knows what he's doing on so many different levels that it is really amazing the amount that he quietly gets done without any fanfare. And in my opinion, this increase is long overdue, well-deserved, and nominal, if anything.
And also, Corey, he's kind of fitting into your plans for your long-term management plans to come on and take on more responsibilities as we get more revenue and more customers in the airport. Isn't that correct? He's being groomed for that.
Absolutely. A good example of that is whenever there was a transition in airport management, he took on management tasks that would not normally be expected of someone in his position. He has actually retained and continued to do some of those tasks. He's absolutely taking on a more administrative role. And for the future of the airport, if we expect to have additional maintenance staff in the future that are capable of doing what he's able to do, he would need to train them. I don't expect that we would be able to hire somebody that has all of these certifications and specialized skills. So he would need to train them.
So 51,000 a year, that hardly seems excessive to me for what he does.
Comments to be made?
Well, I would make a motion to approve the raise that Corey's presented for Rick Lee effective December 1, 2022.
Stan seconds.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to increase the pay rate of Rick Lee effective December 1st, 2022 by 10%. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Airport Manager's Report.
Okay, I have a pretty short manager's report. I think you can look at this agenda and see what I've been working on this month. There was definitely an increase in fuel sales in October over the previous year. I'm not sure exactly why. I don't remember there being a smoke problem last year in October. but this is a pretty notable increase at 149%. One thing that I would definitely like to cover is that there was a series of trespassing incidents recently at the airport. The primary suspect was arrested just after midnight this morning, which is a relief. Rick Lee, he identified the ways that this individual is accessing the airport, and he has already implemented solutions to improve the security of the airport. There are some more improvements that need to be made, but we know what they are, and we're already working on it. The financial audit, I would have liked for that report to have been on this agenda. It didn't quite make this agenda. I do expect it to be done very soon, before the end of the month. For this item, I would like to request a special board meeting so that we're able to make the city's timeline, because we're actually delaying their audit by not completing ours. So hopefully we can get that considered. And of course, that depends on us getting that report in adequate time to make a difference.
Corey, what's the city's deadline, or what is the deadline to do this?
My understanding is the end of this month.
The end of this month?
Yeah.
Okay,
So we would need to have this approved by the board prior to the end of this month.
okay. So if we had the document, we had the audit report, I know I've provided my comments to the auditor, which were requested. We could call a special meeting just for that one item, do it via Zoom. There's no reason to convene in person for that. Quickly vote on it and move on.
All right.
I don't see any problem with that. That's probably the easiest way to do this.
I guess as soon as I get it, we'll
Let
do
me
it,
know.
and we'll
And
do a
then,
notice.
Steve, what's our requirement for how many days out do we have to post public notice of a meeting?
3 business days. We have to post our meeting by 10 a.m. 3 business days before the meeting.
Okay, so we're looking at easily 5 or 6 days from the time we get the document till we have a meeting, just because the way days fall and weekends and that kind of thing.
And you could do it as a telephone call or a Zoom meeting.
Yeah,
or
we don't have to- we don't
however
have
you
to
want to
convene.
do it, whatever's easiest. And not to piggyback on that, but there's an antenna lease that should be like a consent item. It may be easy to throw that on at the same time. They were trying to get all their documents to us for this meeting, and they're ready to install new equipment on our beacon tower.
Is this a consent agenda item, Corey, the audit?
The audit would not be a consent,
Okay,
but the tower lease would be.
okay.
The only other item, so we had an increase in aircraft operations over the previous month at a total of 2,935 according to the ADSB data, and the detailed charts of those operations are below. I did notice that the charts are a little bit more inclusive than they have been in the past. There's some more information there. I especially noticed that they listed some operators, those are probably charter operations, that are more than I've seen in the past. And that is it for the manager's report.
Okay, thank you very much. Steve, do you have anything to report?
I don't have anything additional, but I want to thank you all for the kind words about my legal services.
Fair enough. John is not here, so we don't have a treasurer's report. I have one item to report to Airport Authority members. You all received an email mid to late this afternoon from me. It had an attachment from Senator Jackie Rosen, and she signed a letter on our behalf supporting our endeavors to seek FAA AIP funding for our terminal project. This is the second time the senator has, helped us in that regard, and her office and staff have assisted us. It's the second time because the first time the FAA denied our request. So Maybe the second time will work, maybe the third time will be a charm, but at a minimum, we did receive that support, and that's important, and that document is in your email. Good deal. Yeah, we just got it this afternoon. Any other members of the Airport Authority have anything to report?
We had the partial resolution to some of our driving issues on the airport.
Yes, in fact, we have. Myself and Corey have met with one of the offenders, had a very pleasant meeting with him. He is, no, we had a very pleasant meeting with him. I believe so. We explained to him the gravity of his actions, and he took responsibility for his actions. He understood and showed remorse. We've asked him to volunteer some time helping Corey out. I don't know if he's already done that with a particular project.
Yes, he definitely assisted me.
Had to do with creating driving rules and regs.
Yes,
on-
creating a driver training program for the airport.
So he participated in that. We've asked him to personally apologize to the Airport Authority at his next opportunity in person. And he doesn't have to do that, but he's going to. He's gone now for an extended period of time for many months. The other offender has not even reached out to us. So there were two parties involved. One of the two has made amends, if you will. The other has not.
May I just reiterate to the airport community and to the broader community at large that the potential for a disabled vehicle on an active runway was extremely high.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how many hundreds of times, you know, Carl and I, for example, have come in here at over the threshold at 110 or 120 knots. You know, when visibility is low, we'd have hit that guy. There's no question about it. Probably would have killed everybody on the airplane and killed them too.
We explained to one of the two parties that, you know, the gravity of the situation. And it was received and acknowledged. They understand now, you know, what a severe situation that could have been. And as I told that particular individual, in addition to that, their actions could have killed themselves just by what they were doing out there. So,
And I would just add, you know, to anybody who's listening that if you make a mistake on the airport, self-disclosure is very helpful, and remediation immediately rather than evasion and an attempt to elude responsibility. We're all about safety. You know, if we're unsafe, then everything else we does not matter at all. You know, so.
on that note, last opportunity, any members of the public care to opine on anything? Seeing none.
Michael?
Oh, yeah, oh, I'm sorry, Stan.
Well, this is it for me. Since we
Oh,
don't
my
have-
good.
Don't have a meeting in Christmas. I thank every one of you for your consideration, including me on the report and the board for the last 2 years. I have no idea who will replace me. And I want to thank you. I want to wish you all a happy holidays.
Stan, you have been an absolute pleasure to work with. No, you have. And I've personally enjoyed working with you immensely. I'm a little shocked. I didn't even think about it. I knew the day was coming. I knew that. I didn't realize today's the day. Thank you for your service to the airport. Well, we appreciate. I knew that was coming up. Anybody else? Any other comments from the Airport Authority?
Well,
No?
I just thank you, Stan. Stan and I soldiered together more years ago than we would like to admit.
No, thank you.
Godspeed. You know.
We really, really have appreciated your input and efforts. Thanks a lot. On that note, our next regular meeting is in January. We do not hold a meeting in December. There's always some sort of conflict with Christmas. When you look at the calendar, people are focused on holidays. So we won't convene again for a regular meeting until January 18th. That'll be our next meeting. And on that note, we adjourn.